search warrant! Columbia Police, search warrant! Get to the door! Go, go, go! Get to the door! Police department, don't move! Police department, don't move! Police department, don't move! Police department, don't move! Move past him! Move past! Come on, guys, you're fine. You're fine. You're fine. Somebody turn around. Stay around. Don't move! You understand? Put your hands behind your back! Do it now! Behind your back! You shoot my dog! You shot my fucking dog! Oh my God! My dog is not nice! What the fuck did you do that for?
If you cannot afford to hire a lawyer, one will be appointed to represent you for the question if you wish. You can decide at any time to exercise these rights, not answer any questions, make any statements you understand. Do you understand?
We'll take that as a yes.
We can't live in a society which is both free and drug-free. You can't have them both.
The whole process of moving from one state of mind, being persuaded to another by seeing the truth, is one of actually feeling an identification that resonates and has a feeling of wholeness and coherence to it. It makes chaos orderly.
It's the mindset that got us here and the journey that we've taken. 50 years of criminalization. It came out of the whole idea that we don't have to care for each other anymore. It's every man for himself. We weren't always like that. The question is, can we go back to caring about each other?
What are the nuances that define a culture? Is it the way we police ourselves? The way we take care of our sick? How we govern? The way we share information? 77 years ago, marijuana became prohibited in the United States. By 1961, its criminalization reached global status. Today, we find the topic of marijuana's legality penetrating all forms of media and every level of politics. It is now the polarizing topic in an endless display of public debates. The goal? To answer the question that refuses to die. Should marijuana be legalized? But ever so slowly, a second question is starting to appear. A question that seeks an answer to whether marijuana prohibition itself has gained characteristics that reveal a greater truth about ourselves and the way our society operates.
Is this a bad idea? Is this a downward spiral of our culture?
A new study reveals that smoking marijuana could increase your risk for testicular cancer.
So the research doesn't bother you that smoking pot can cause man boobs?
Pot just makes you dumb.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel?
Marijuana leads to breast development in males. Like all of these myths, front page story. Those things have been coming along one after another.
I should be impotent when I smoke marijuana. Well, I'm not, you know.
The thought process behind demonizing something like marijuana is completely out of ignorance. Where's the bodies? Where's the numbers? Is there one?
Because I have heard from experts whose judgment I respect that they don't know of any.
The only way marijuana can kill you is you take 25 pounds of it and you throw it out of a CIA drug plane and it hits you in the fucking head. That's how you die from marijuana. There's that famous 911 call where those cops stole pot from some kids and turned it into pot brownies and then ate the brownies and freaked the fuck out and called the cops on themselves.
How much did you guys have?
I don't know. We made brownies, and I think we're dead. Time is going by really, 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 really slow.
It's beautiful, because they thought they were dying, time was going by really slow, then it ends, they're fine.
But everyone can agree, anti-marijuana ads in this country have gotten fucking ridiculous. Like a girl will be melted on the couch with no bones, and she's like, I smoke pot, now I don't have bones.
I associated a lot of these people that were smoking pot with poorly motivated people who were failures. I had a prejudiced perception of what marijuana actually did to a human being.
Among the perceived harms of marijuana, 2 seem to arise on a daily basis more than any others. 2 seem to be the main reasons given for why marijuana must be kept from the public. The first?
There's the famous just one spliff and you will go mental.
Wait, all right, lads. The more you mess with cannabis, the more it can mess with your mind.
Now, you know, my first 7 years as a researcher were devoted to schizophrenia. I can tell you, that is ridiculous.
We looked at the evidence. I think we must have gone through about 2,000 papers, and it doesn't cause schizophrenia. Maybe there are some individuals with schizophrenia in which the illness is brought on perhaps a little earlier because they smoke cannabis.
There often is what's called a precipitating event. A precipitating event is something like an important loss of a person, a severe car accident.
It certainly can be exacerbated by a number of drugs.
You know, a bad alcohol trip, that could serve as a precipitating event too. The fact is, schizophrenia has a prevalence of about 1% the world around. Cannabis use, let's start with the 60s, it's gone up like that.
So, you've introduced this new thing. If it's schizophrenogenic, we should see a significant uptick in schizophrenia. We should see more people with schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia has stayed just like that.
In all of the epidemiologic studies that I'm aware of, there is no uptick. So if marijuana causes schizophrenia, it was introduced, now we should have more schizophrenia. We don't see that.
We would certainly see some little rise in that, given the numbers of people who have used this.
You really don't need to strip this back and address this from a neutral platform to understand that anything to do with mental health is such a tenuous issue built up on different contributing factors. And by applying it all to cannabis, you are possibly doing more harm because you are negating all these other factors that certainly play a part.
For a lot of people, the impact of life itself is overwhelming, so they'll seek out something to distract them. Whether it's drinking cough syrup, or it's taking naps, or jerking off, or gambling. There's a lot of things that people do to distract them from the angst of being alive.
It might not be for you. It might make you paranoid. You might have smoked some bad weed once and thought you were having a heart attack.
Cannabis is not for everybody. Nobody should be forced to use it.
There's a lot of reasons why marijuana might not be for you, but you shouldn't tell me that it's not right for me.
The most frequently cited perceived harm associated with marijuana today is addiction.
I mean, you do know it's addictive, highly addictive, right?
Because I believe it is addictive and it leads to more serious drugs.
But in order to understand addiction in relation to marijuana, one must first have an understanding of the psychology behind addiction in the first place.
It's interesting to see or to ask who becomes addicted. People can have sex without being addicted to it, they can go shopping, but some people become severely addicted to all these pursuits. Is a pack of cards addictive? Well, no, or yes, depending on the individual. So it's the same process no matter what the addiction is. The only difference is that the substance addict is getting the dopamine from an outside substance, whereas the behavior addict is having it triggered from the particular behavior. If I speak to a group of 100 people or 1,000 people and I ask, well, how many of you have addiction issues to any substance? A number of people put their hand up and I say, what did it do for you? Not what was bad about it, we already know that, but what did it do for you? What was positive in your experience of it? Well, it gave me a sense of peace. It gave me pain relief. It made me feel more connected. It made me more confident. I could speak now and interact with other people. In other words, the addict is just after wanting to be a normal human being. And the real question is, what keeps them from having those qualities in their lives and what happened to them? And so that the addiction should be seen not as the problem, although it is a problem, But it's not the problem, it's the addict's attempt to solve a problem in the first place. The adverse childhood experiences studies done in California looked at conditions such as physical, sexual, and emotional abuse in the child's life, the loss of a parent through death, or a rancorous divorce, or a parent being jailed, or mental illness in the parent, or addiction in the parent, or violence in the family. And for each of these adverse childhood experiences, the risk of addiction goes up exponentially. By the time a male child has had 6 of these adverse experiences, his risk of having become a substance-dependent, injection-using addict is 4,600% greater than that of a male child with no such experiences. Why is that? It's because that trauma shapes the brain in such ways as to make the addictive substances more appealing to the individual. That trauma also gives that person the pain that they will try to then escape from or to soothe through the addictive behaviors. It's the social and emotional environment that shapes the actual biology of the brain. So if you understand somebody's addiction, you have to look at what created pain in their lives. So the person who occasionally has a beer, occasionally smokes marijuana, but genuinely have no negative consequences, does not impair their health, does not endanger their lives, it does not impair their personal relationships. You can't call those people addicts, and you can't call those behaviors addictive. So that we have to make a real distinction between the use of substances and the addiction to substances. Which then brings us to the war on drugs. Basically, the war on drugs is being waged against people that were abused and traumatized in children and have mental health problems. There's enough punishment in there, in the negative consequences of the addiction, that we don't have to add punishment onto that. The number of deaths around the world from cigarette consumption is 5.5 million, according to latest estimates. Annually, cigarettes kill as many people as were killed in the Germans' anti-Jewish genocidal campaign. So we have a Holocaust annually, owing to cigarettes.
If you smoke more than 2 packs a day, the risk for developing lung cancer was 20-fold. That's 2,000%. Based on the largest case control study ever done, there was no evidence that marijuana increased the risk of lung cancer.
You got to have some consistency. There's a million different drugs that are sanctioned by the society that don't have that happy ending, that you take too much and you're fucked.
I've got a friend whose auntie had to go to rehab for buying 2 boxes of Krispy Kremes every day and eating them in the woods so nobody found her. Based on that anecdote, let's make Krispy Kremes illegal. I will fight any man, by the way, who suggests that.
That's just like eating a pound of salt and dying. Yeah, you didn't use salt right, dude. You fucked up with salt. If you just threw some salt on popcorn, it's actually quite yummy, you know? But what'd you do, you stupid fuck? You ate a pound of salt and you died. Doesn't mean we should outlaw salt.
Our society doesn't object to people jumping out of airplanes at 15,000 feet with parachutes. Occasionally, those parachutes break. People die. Our society doesn't object to people climbing mountains. Occasionally, people fall off mountains and do harm to themselves. But it's not illegal to climb a mountain.
If I had to compare marijuana to alcohol, from the medical point of view, if I asked the question, well, which of these has more potentially debilitating and harmful, life-threatening, health-eroding effects, there's no comparison, there's no context. Alcohol wins hands down.
To the tune of 50,000 plus per year die from alcohol poisoning. They literally drink themselves to death. Pot zero.
Do we have a war on alcohol and tobacco, when alcohol is the drug that's involved with more murders than any other drug on planet Earth?
How do we view the effect of beer? Come on now.
Holy we are so dependent on it. If you have a social gathering and there isn't booze there, people lose their minds. Celebrating. Let's go to the pub. When we talk about commiserating, let's go to the pub. I'm happy. Let's go to the pub. My dog died. Let's go to the pub.
It's Wednesday, best day of the week.
Great job getting us drunk.
We could all use a stiff drink. Fantastic. Margarita day.
If you're not going to drink it, pass it around.
How are you guys spending New Year's Eve?
I'm going to get real drunk.
Many years ago, we did a poll in Parliament and we asked them, you know, is alcohol a drug? And the majority of politicians said alcohol is not a drug. And they say, well, it's not a drug because it's not illegal. And that gets to this peculiar, dangerous concept that once something's illegal, it must be dangerous. And when something's not illegal, it must be safe.
So it's interesting, if we look at the whole issue of illegal drugs in our society, you will find that when the word drug is used to refer to those substances, another word is almost always attached to it, and that is abuse. Drug abuse.
What happens is that all illicit drugs get lumped together. Caffeine is a drug. Alcohol is a drug.
Tylenol is a drug. Sudafed is a drug.
Viagra is a drug. People, when they think of drugs, they think only of illicit drugs.
There's a mass of disinformation, and that misinformation and disinformation confuses the shit out of people when they're trying to form their version of what's good and what's bad in the world.
If it's absurd to throw somebody in prison for drinking coffee or for drinking wine, then it's equally absurd and wrong to throw somebody in prison for smoking cannabis.
Nobody has ever overdosed on cannabis. Did you know that?
So what? They can't perform daily functions. They're going to be on my tax bill.
The idea that one is okay and one isn't just seemed to require something resembling evidence before you could make that statement definitively.
One of the things that I think is important about marijuana use or alcohol use or anything is that you're responsible with it. And you could be irresponsible with anything. You should weigh the risks and the rewards.
There's no moral middle ground. Indifference is not an option. We want you to help us create an outspoken intolerance for drug use.
Is the rationale of protecting people from themselves valid?
The only people who are responsible for protecting us from ourselves are ourselves. If our society denies us the opportunity to make mistakes, it's denying us a very fundamental human right, because mistakes are part of the teaching process in this life.
Tell another grown human being, oh, not allowed that. A grown man. No, not you. But I'm a grown-up. I'm an evolved human being. No, just put that down.
If there's a real harm in a drug, and your real objective is to persuade people that they shouldn't harm themselves in that way, you don't need laws that send them to prison. What you need is good information that they'll believe. Just disseminate that information, and free, independent, sovereign adults will make their own choices about that information, either to continue with that drug or not to continue with it, but they have the facts.
If a professional like you cannot answer clearly that meth is more dangerous than marijuana, which every kid on the street knows, which every parent knows, if you can't answer that, maybe that's why we're failing to educate people about the dangers. I don't want kids smoking marijuana. I agree with the chairman. But if the deputy director of the Office of Drug Policy can't answer that question, how do you expect high school kids to take you seriously?
I empathize with parents of teenage kids. They can get lost. Kids sitting in school stoned. You can't accept a position that says, oh, that's fine, no problem. Yeah, it's a problem. But the question is whether it's a criminal problem. The question is whether it's a growing up kind of a problem. I want reasons more than you need to be afraid of some cop catching you and locking you up forever in a prison to talk to my children about how they relate to various temptations in life.
This country is held up as a model around the world of dealing with cigarette smoking. We brought it down, way down. Why? By educating people.
It doesn't make sense to punish people if what you're mainly worried about is their welfare.
Name something that gets passed around. Chris.
A joint.
A joint? The moral question of drug use, you can set aside because the drug use and the drug abuse is here.
We have a real fundamental enjoyment of changing the way that this thing operates. And for as long as that is true, you have demand. You don't have to be a capitalist, you don't have to be an economist, but we all know where there is demand, there is supply.
A plant that's very easy to grow suddenly becomes something that's worth thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a pound because you're compensating the producers and the transporters for the risk of going to jail or being arrested or being shot or other things that happen to people involved in criminal activity.
And with that profit comes opportunity, sometimes to the most unlikely of people.
I went to Oxford to study nuclear physics and did some postgraduate in history and philosophy of science, but forsook the halls of academia to become a dope smuggler. But quite early on, I started smuggling cannabis from Europe to America. In those days, in the very early 70s, there'd be a markup of about 300%. British bands are beginning to get very popular, and they were visiting the States with an awful lot of equipment. So we used to hide the hashish in various speakers and amplifiers, etc. Pink Floyd, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Eric Clapton, Genesis. The bands didn't know that it was just an arrangement I made with the road managers. Organizations I was involved with the Mafia, the Yakuza, the IRA, and a few cowboys from the CIA. But it wasn't under CIA auspices, you know, it was just a few cowboys who were doing things behind the rest of the CIA's back. Consignments I did into JFK in New York with the Gambino family. The deal was structured in such a way that one couldn't cheat them, even if one was daft enough to try. The average load would be about a ton. I had a huge number of aliases during my smuggling career, at least 43 aliases. But it was so much easier in those days to get a false passport. I remember on one occasion applying to the driving license center for a license in the name of Elvis Presley, of whom I'm a big fan, okay? And they actually issued it because computers didn't scream in the 50s, right? So, Elvis Presley, fine. The biggest shipment ever that I did was 30 tons. The DEA say it was 50 tons, but I know it was only 30 tons. The British had more or less given up, and no, you can't catch him. Spanish had given up, you know, you can't catch him. Americans said, no, we'll catch him. And they were right. It was a combined effort of 14 different countries' law enforcement, spearheaded by the DEA, actually. Cannabis was the only drug I smuggled. I think largely because I wasn't really tempted to do anything else. The demand for cannabis wasn't met. If cannabis had been legal, I would have carried on being an academic in some sort. I do miss smuggling, you know, you can never get that thrill, you know, that I had from crossing borders, from writing. You can't. And I suppose if I thought I could get away with it, I'd crank it up today. I'd go back and do it. I mean, I loved it.
It's interesting when you look at the amount of money that these drugs are generating. Where does that money go? And who's handling it?
With the vast amounts of money to be made, the potential for a dark side of the underground market begins to grow. With enough time and enough money, it can rise to inconceivable levels, and often right under our nose.
What the drug war has done to Mexico is horrific. The death toll alone in the Mexican drug war under the Calderon administration, it's more than the number of Americans that were lost in Vietnam.
Now we're up to 70,000 dead. 70,000!
The bloodshed follows a mass killing in the Mexican border city of Nuevo Laredo last week, where 9 bodies were left for the public to see, and 14 other bodies were found mutilated.
And this is happening on our southern border, and yet very little attention is paid to it.
It is the United States that sends the guns across the borders to Mexico. It's the United States that then, in return for the guns, imports the drugs.
A lot of people think that those 70,000 dead are all gangsters shooting it out with each other. Not true. They're police officers, their children, their families, their mothers and fathers.
You're raising your kids with an education, and your kids go off to a nightclub some night and they never come home. Why? Because kids have been kidnapped at random and mutilated.
beyond the horrific death toll and the horrific acts of violence and decapitations and bodies hanging from bridges, the drug wars really led to a deterioration in the infrastructures of society, which means that virtually every municipal police force in much of Mexico is corrupted by one cartel or another. What does that mean? That means if you're a lower middle class Mexican, your house gets broken into, who do you call? Right? You have nobody to go to. And if you do call the police, well, they're just as likely to tell the cartel, hey, this person's ratting on you, as they are to come and help you and take a report and bring somebody to jail. So if you murder somebody in Mexico, you have less than a 5% chance of ever spending a day in jail for that. And that is almost entirely a product of what the drug war has done to law enforcement, the judiciary, and the correction systems in Mexico. The last thing a Mexican drug trafficking cartel would want would be for drugs to be legalized in the United States, because that would take away their primary source of income.
How do you kill a cartel and the street gang organization in drugs? You take their source of nutrition away. Their source of nutrition is money, drug money. You dry them up.
The idea that you're going to be able to somehow or another make marijuana illegal and it's not going to have some impact on organized crime is so fucking dumb. It's childish.
This prohibition allows them to flourish. I mean, it did with alcohol.
When prohibition was going on and the mafia and Al Capone and all them motherfuckers was in control, they ran that shit.
The American people soon came to understand that prohibition of alcohol brought greater harm than the abuse of alcohol.
The current prohibition on the marijuana laws makes everything more dangerous.
$370 billion a year go into underworld's pockets, and bad people with that kind of money can do horrendous things.
If marijuana prohibition isn't achieving the goals we think it should, what has caused it to be pursued the way it has? What are the elements that keep it propped up? And where did it all start? While most fingers might point to the year 1937 when marijuana was first outlawed by a tax stamp required for hemp, let's fast forward 34 years to 1971. That was the year the public first heard this.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to summarize for you the meeting that I have just had with bipartisan leaders. America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
Attorney General Kleindienst for Nixon was quoted thereafter, and he was sorrowful that he had been involved in this. He said that they knew in the Nixon administration that drug treatment works and incarceration does not, but the enormous political benefit by declaring a war on drugs that can't really fight back. He said they chose the incarceration route for political reasons and then were absolutely overwhelmed at the positive political benefits that they received for doing that.
There's actual documentation that shows the United States government under Nixon was actively writing to universities and saying, pull your information of cannabis and hemp and marijuana out of your libraries. Literally, purge it.
So it took from about 1972, 71, 72, to the late 1970s to create this myth that marijuana would lead to using harder substances. Once that myth was established, then the numbers exploded, and you go to Congress and get money.
I am glad that in this administration we have increased the amount of money for handling the problem of dangerous drugs sevenfold. It will be $600 million this year. This is one area where we cannot have budget cuts because we must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one in the United States, the problem of dangerous drugs.
Most law enforcement agencies before the 1970s had very small narcotic units because narcotics wasn't seen as a big problem. By the end of the decade, the narcotic units had exploded. Federal money came in. And then Ronald Reagan came.
Tonight, I can report to you that we've made much progress. 37 federal agencies are working together in a vigorous national effort. And by next year, our spending for drug law enforcement will have more than tripled from its 1981 levels.
Whenever we hear the word war on anything, I think it should alert our antenna that a mind management game is going on.
Well, what is meant by war on drugs? That's a very good question. I mean, how can you have a war on a noun? It's a bit like, again, the war on terror. It's a war on a concept.
We humans are very motivated by war. We are extremely motivated by a metaphor of violent confrontation. It goes all the way back to the very first foremothers of all life on Earth, bacteria, 3.85 billion years ago. Bacteria are incredibly social. They live in armies. They live in armies of 7 trillion. And they are constantly communicating with each other. They're constantly exchanging data. It's a little information processing network. But what happens when 2, 3, 4, or 7 colonies of bacteria all discover the same food source? They make war. What motivates ants? They go about doing their daily business all of the time, but when an alarm pheromone hits that indicates there's been an invasion from outside the colony, whammo! Everybody drops what they're doing. Everybody rushes to the site of the breach where the odor, the alarm pheromone is coming from. I mean, we humans, we're the children of bacteria. We humans, we're the cousins of ants. Just tell us there's an outsider at the gates. You use the metaphor of war for just about anything, and it gets us roused. But especially use it about our group versus another group, our subculture versus another subculture, and you can really get us going.
It's clear neurolinguistic programming, because if you associate war, you associate it with a nation having to pull together to fight a baddie out there.
Now, some folks will tell you that I'm dealing in poison, but hey, do I look like the kind of guy that would do that to a kid like you? Yes.
It's a rhetorical frame in which the sacrifice of individual liberty seems necessary. This is what's needed to win the war.
Last year alone, over 10,000 drug criminals were convicted, and nearly $250 million of their assets were seized by the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration. These are a measure of our commitment and emerging signs that we can defeat this enemy.
Astounding thing about the war on drugs is how long it's gone on and how little progress has been made.
When I was working for MI5, I had my first sort of inkling that all was not good, because I was working on the Irish Terrorist Logistics Desk, which is the movement of people and weapons into and out of the UK. And of course, doing that, I had to work very closely with Customs, which is there to try and stop the drugs coming into the UK. They just knew it was like looking for the needle in a haystack just to try and stop these drugs flooding into the UK.
I had record-breaking arrests. I had record-breaking interdiction of supply. But it didn't make one iota of difference.
You don't see us knocking off the big guys so often that, you know, there's scarcity of drugs. When was the last time you couldn't cop marijuana in this country? I mean, there's panic in Needle Park. There's no marijuana out there. My God, what am I going to do?
I don't think you could go into any high school in the country. I don't think you could go into any small town in this country. I don't think you could go into any prison in this country and not find marijuana if you were looking for it. So the argument that marijuana prohibition has had any impact on the availability of the drug, I think really doesn't hold water.
What we see are a regular meal of arrest and how many bales of this or kilos of that.
The showing tells us the glamour side of it.
Look at this. All of this pot found inside one semi-truck, 20,000 pounds worth. Border Patrol calling it the biggest bust in our state's history.
You wheel out your 60, 70, 80 kilos of marijuana, your 2 assault rifles. The thing of it is, if you took the average show and tell from the average arrest, you'd have some little kid, I mean, he might be 15, 17, 18, 20 years old, and you would proudly display a small bag of marijuana on your table and say, "We got him. We got him."
Came from Ontario, Oregon into Idaho with some mushrooms and some weed, and I got caught with an exhaust, so he pulled me over. He put his head in the window, said he smelled it, he didn't need a dog, so I just handed it to him just to get it over with.
It's such a joke to say that they're going after hardcore criminals. About 1.5 million arrests on drug-related offenses in the year 2011. About 50% were for marijuana use.
It's practically legal. I get that all the time, especially here in California. And what I say to those people is it's absolutely not practically legal. It's very, very federally illegal.
Just an ongoing story that at this point, really, it seems little more than the premise for television shows.
Synthetic marijuana, dangerous, deadly, illegal. Tonight, the county's top cop says much of this stuff was being made in the back of that plaza.
They got away with it for a little bit, but at the end of the day, they're not going to get away with it for very long.
There's another aspect to this game that is the economic side of it. There's a deal between the feds and the state, and that's asset seizures.
They call it an equitable sharing program, where they encourage local law enforcement to seize items that may be involved in criminal activity. They do an 80-20 split.
Without even getting a conviction, and then they keep the bulk of the money or the assets seized.
Maybe you just want to see the kind of stuff the government seizes from criminals. Right now, you can actually check out a number of forfeited vehicles going up for auction tomorrow at the Apple Towing in Guadalupe.
These are awesome cars. This one caught my eye, of course, first. It's a 1968 Chevy Camaro.
The guy with the nice ride, I'll lock him up. I'll seize his car. I'll hit a house. I'll seize bank accounts. I'll seize land. All because I'm producing for the state. There's an incentive for the state to say, do it. But the law is such that the onus to get back your property is on you, not on the police department. You have to fight to get back something through the court system that they took away, that they had no right taking in the first place.
Between 1989 and 2010, an estimated $12.6 billion was seized by U.S. attorneys in asset forfeiture cases. The growth rate of seizures during that time was nearly a 20% increase every single year.
In a country where I grew up, America, where, you know, everybody's so proud of having guns and proud of their freedom. No, I'm not afraid. Really go plant some cannabis in your front yard and tell me how fast it takes for the man to come and take everything you own.
Every year, the DEA tells you how many seizures they made. All that tells you is that we have failed again.
What's your budget?
Well, currently,
approximately.
$2 million.
$2 million?
$2 billion.
Yeah.
You can look into any federal agency you want to. Literally in their budget, you will see that extra tens of millions of dollars are earmarked expressly to fight the war on drugs.
When you get to the top of both towers, the interests are the same. The major drug dealer wants to continue selling drugs. Law enforcement wants to continue trying to prosecute the people who are using the drugs, and there's a harmony there.
Have you ever seen the film of the head of the DEA, Lionheart, I believe is her name, when they asked her, is marijuana worse than heroin? And she sat there and stuttered around. She wouldn't answer the question.
Is crack worse for a person than marijuana?
I believe all illegal drugs are bad.
Is methamphetamine worse for somebody's health than marijuana?
I don't think any illegal drug
is good. Heroin worse for someone's health than marijuana?
Again,
I mean, either yes, no, or I don't know. I mean, if you don't know, you can look this up. You should know this as the chief administrator for the Drug Enforcement Agency. I'm asking you a very straightforward question.
She couldn't answer the question because she's a dyed-in-the-wool prohibitionist. And her industry, her life, is dependent upon us continuing to put 43 million people in jail.
About 85% of everybody in our country that uses any form of illicit substance whatsoever uses only marijuana. And so if you were to remove those people from the criminal justice system, the sheer number of everyone else in the country using every other illegal drug combined would not justify this colossal bureaucracy we have to fight the war on drugs. It would fall apart. If you lose marijuana prohibition, you lose drug prohibition, and the government knows it. They don't want to give that up because of the sheer money involved.
Going down the path to legalization in this country is reckless and irresponsible. It scares us. The treatment people are afraid. The education people are afraid. Law enforcement is worried what is going to happen.
People say, well, the vice cops who work on marijuana prohibition would be out of work, the people who work for the DEA, some of them would be out of jobs, the White House Drug Czar office, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's just the most lunatic defense of prohibition. By that logic, we should prohibit everything, because then we'd need cops to enforce food prohibition and housing prohibition and medicine prohibition.
Beginning in the 1980s, the police departments became a number-driven group. One arrest is one arrest. So if I spend a year and a half taking down a violent drug organization that's killed maybe 15, 20 people, and I lock up 6 guys, I get 6 ones. If I went out on the corner tomorrow, I get 15 ones. And they all count the same. There's no weighing for, like, this is the murderer, we give him 15 points, and this guy's the marijuana guy, we give him 0.2 points. No, it's all the same.
One thing about a cannabis arrest is it's easy, it's not dangerous, and it turns into a solved crime very quickly with very little paperwork.
The whole thing is numbers, because numbers generate revenue. That revenue keeps Congress giving you money. That money, then you can turn around part of it and keep pressure on Congress.
You don't come up with those numbers, they retaliate by giving you bad evaluations. That's basically what they did to me.
This is a business. We have almost a $5 billion budget a year, so we run it like a business, and it's fair to ask the employees here to do their fair share.
It's not easy to get a trafficker. It's not like walking up to the corner or shaking the lockers of a high school.
You reach a point, especially as an executive or a supervisor, where you are now part of administering the policies, and you start to ask the hard questions. Is it really worth a police officer's time to bust somebody for a marijuana cigarette, take them off the street, put them in jail, book the evidence, write the report, and then be able to go back out on the street and attend to public safety after you've been gone for 3 hours for one marijuana arrest?
I used to go to meetings of chief police officers in the UK. After the formal conference was over, around the bar and around the dinner table, they were all agreeing that there was no point in keeping cannabis illegal, and yet what they said when the cameras were rolling, when the microphones were in front of them, was completely different.
In the 15 years I've been in policy, I'm a little disillusioned about how much we were able to achieve. I'm very disillusioned on the ability of leaders to still pretend we are achieving.
You know, we need police forces. If I was in charge of society, of course I'd have a police force. But I make sure there are sensible laws for them to enforce. And there are plenty of police who feel like that too.
There's immense pressure on the inside of these sort of professions to toe the line and just keep quiet.
The culture will eat you up if, in fact, you come out while you're a police leader. If they were to come out and say that they're in favor of taxation, regulation of marijuana, they wouldn't get their promotions. They wouldn't be able to move through the ranks. They'll be labeled. And I've seen that take place.
There's a lot of work being done on what creates respect for laws. To what extent do people feel that laws are legitimate? And if they feel that laws are legitimate, they're likely to comply with them without needing to be coerced into them and punished. And the research is suggesting that people want fairness.
In a sense, what creates respect for law is justice, seeing it done. That elicits great respect when you actually see it being done. There's another kind of respect, though, which is respect for the stick. It's like the force of authority. Pretty much marijuana works with the stick.
One of the consequences of the war on drugs is people have stopped looking at the police as their protectors and more see them, right, as their potential persecutors.
The police department basically becomes the other to the community. And once you have that breakdown, then information stops flowing. So you don't learn about crimes. And then the only crime you really become interested in is the one you can solve, which is locking people up on the corner for using drugs.
And a great metric of that is murder clearance rates. So a murder is cleared when an arrest is made, somebody goes to jail. And in 1965, police were clearing about 90% of the murders that were committed in this country. That means for 90% of the murders in this country, there was an arrest and a charge. And today, that's under 65%. And that's, after all the tremendous technological advances in policing, DNA evidence and all sorts of forensics and, expanding police budgets and that sort of thing. I think if we were to look at one cause for that drop in murder clearance rates, it's the breakdown in the relationship between society at large and the police. And, that, by extension, that is a consequence almost entirely of the war on drugs.
By having to uphold these outdated and failed policies, it ruins our reputation, and it damages the community relations between the police and the policed as well. Whole generations have grown up distrusting their local police rather than seeing them as a potential protective layer of society.
When you do this, you change the whole nature of the game. And from 1980 on, the police become more and more militarized.
The initiation of the drug war was the initiation of a general loosening of constraint on search and seizure. It became just part of police practice to be breaking down the door. We see it now as a staple of cops. That's now our reality. That wasn't the reality before the drug war.
Columbia Police search warrant! Columbia Police search warrant! Columbia Police search warrant! Bang. Search warrant! Search warrant! Don't move! Stand by! Don't move! Search warrant! Search warrant! Don't move! Search warrant! Don't move!
That's on him?
Yep. Money in the dope.
Now you see police, and most often they look like soldiers, right? They're dressed in black, they have jackboots, and high caliber arms, and they don't walk the street and get to know the community, right? They drive around in cruisers that look like they belong on the battlefield.
Day and night, that's the difference between the Greenville Police Department's new SWAT truck compared to the old one.
The truck has a lot of bells and whistles, from the simple storage compartments to the gun ports on the side. They're actually proud to say they did not use any taxpayer money.
We paid for it with seized funds. It came out of money we had seized from drug dealers.
That's where respect is lost. The officers on the street have lost it. The institution itself has lost it. You're not being seen as anything but the other. People warring on us.
The war on drugs has had a puzzling effect on how society seeks to police itself. With hundreds of thousands of marijuana arrests annually, a new issue emerges. Once you start gathering a large group of prisoners, where do you put them all?
Well, private prisons are scary as all shit. And they're scary as all hell for a very simple reason. They make it highly profitable to incarcerate people.
We've lost track of how ridiculous some of the things we do are. So we're going to give people a profit motive in putting more people in jail. Gee, I wonder what's going to happen.
Corrections Corporation of America is the Hilton of the private prison industry, a multi-billion-dollar business that's getting rich off punishment.
We are CCA.
The more people locked up behind bars and the longer they stay there, the more money CCA makes. Last year, the company banked a reported $1.7 billion.
When you have a privatized prison, there's a contract between the state and the prison that the state has to maintain a certain occupancy rate in the prison.
Meaning that the state guarantees that the prison stay will be from anywhere from 80% to 100% full.
Crime could go down. It doesn't matter. The taxpayers are still on the hook, and the government is still on the hook for filling up your prisons.
Well, where do you get these numbers from?
The easiest way to make sure that the quotas are full in these private prisons is to get the low-hanging fruit, which is just the drug user as a criminal rather than someone who might need a bit of medical help.
And that means that every fourth person in the world in jail is a citizen of the land of the free.
You just become a commodity rather than a human being, churned through the system to make money for these big corporations.
If we go on down this path, we'll see more and more laws being invented and created to justify the imprisonment of more and more people. Public money will ironically be plunged into persuading us that that is right.
Each state is constantly arguing about the fact that they don't have enough money for their public education. But then at the same time, they'll take state funds, or in a lot of cases, federal money, and put it into the prison system.
Now, this is Carl Holton School. It's been closed for some time now, and in its place will rise a hospital prison with over 1,700 beds.
California, since 1980, we have built 23 prisons. We've hired 14,000 prison guards, and we've fired 5,000 teachers.
West Virginia is strapped for money, but we're building another prison here. Got to. A lot of people getting arrested here.
Most states are just like mine of California. The largest, strongest political lobby group in our state is the Prison Guards Union.
You have unions that are lobbying to make sure that certain drugs stay illegal, regardless of how safe they are, to make sure that prisons are filled, because prisons extract money from the system. It's insanity.
It's not rational or logical. It's financial. Money is the backdrop to everything. You can't even run from it. I try to see other things or put, other perspectives on it, but it always boils down to money.
We've even seen places like Pennsylvania where judges have gone and faced high federal sentences for actually streamlining children into these private facilities.
A former juvenile court judge in Pennsylvania could face more than 10 years in prison after being convicted in a Kids for Cash scheme. Prosecutors say he used children as pawns, locking them up unjustly in a plot to get rich.
Remember my son? An all-star wrestler? He's gone! He shot himself in the heart! You scumbag! You ruined my fucking life!
And what could be more harmful to oneself than being sent to prison? No effect of the drug can be possibly as harmful as doing jail time for consuming it.
And they end up with a criminal record. What does that do to them? They could lose their job. In some parts of the world, they will lose their housing. They will lose the right to education.
There's a fucking kid who just got arrested recently for having marijuana on him. They put him in jail, and he had an extreme food allergy. He asked them if there was any milk in any of their products. They wouldn't answer him. They gave him food. He ate it. He fucking died in jail.
How criminal is that? What they've made illegal isn't the problem, right? The problem is the policy itself.
This business about drug offenses, I mean, it's time we stop locking up people for possession of marijuana.
Selects people that it puts in jail. So we see widely disparate penalties among socioeconomic groups, among racial groups.
White people and black people in this country do drugs at the same rate. So they should be arrested at the same rate. But the reality is, of course, that's not remotely true. Across the nation, blacks are arrested at 4 times the rate of whites. Now, in some places, like Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., Iowa, it's 8 times the rate. So why in the world would you be arresting black Americans at 8 times the rate, or even nationwide at 4 times the rate of whites? They're using it at the same rate. You have no excuse.
If you're a young black man walking around the streets of London today, you are 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched on suspicion of carrying drugs.
I've risen through classes, so I know, you know what I mean, the difference. Growing up in Pittsburgh, just being on the streets, if I got, caught with some weed, they're gonna look at me as I'm selling some weed or I'm trying to get some weed to one of their kids. I look like a threat. But when I started rapping and started associating myself with other people, started getting money, and I'm like, oh, he's not dangerous. He can smoke.
The war on drugs is one of those issues that highlights very clearly there is one law for the rich and powerful and one law for the rest of us.
HSBC is a giant bank that actually laundered money for the Mexican drug cartels, billions of dollars. Nobody went to jail.
Naturally, if there's a big bank that is laundering money for drug cartels, they should face a federal prosecution and criminal charges. But that's not what happened. They got a fine of $1.9 billion.
Well, what's a fine to HSBC? It's pocket change. It's one of the costs of doing business, and nobody goes to jail. And a mother of 4 is arrested for $30 worth of pot, and she's put in jail for 10 years. There's a simple difference. The people at HSBC are in the elite. The woman with the $30 worth of pot is not. Every animal that's ever had a hierarchical social structure going all the way back to lizards, lobsters, and puppy dogs has built that structure on prohibition. And there's always been a chicken at the bottom of the pecking order, and the one on the bottom of the pecking order ends up in a miserable, god-awful, picked on, pecked on state. And that isn't mankind's social invention. That is Mother Nature's social invention. Does that mean it's good? Hell no. And it's our job to reverse it, natural or not. Empathy is all it really takes to open up the avenues of outrage and realize how appalling this is. Let's remember something, boys and girls. Jails are there for people who hit us over the head when we're walking down the street. Jails are there for people who break into our homes and loot the place. Jails are there for people who do genuine harm. So I have no right to put them in jail for having a different lifestyle than mine. In fact, if I were to do that, it would be criminal.
And yet, the war on marijuana continues on. Only now with new medical discoveries. You might ask yourself, what possible health benefits could an illegal plant have? The answer is starting to become more clear. It begins with something that each and every one of us has. It's something called the endocannabinoid system.
We think of marijuana as this violent, unnatural intrusion on human biology. It's not. We are built with all kinds of receptors for cannabis.
Cannabis mimics endogenous chemicals that we already produce in the body called endocannabinoids. That's why we have receptors that pretty well fit cannabis.
Cannabinoids, are these 20 carbon molecules that we produce, that the plant produces. There's over 100 of them in the plant, and these two systems work together to regulate cell cluster, cell, and intracellular functions. All the cannabinoids do is help cells function. They don't care what the cell does. They don't care if it's contracting, secreting thyroid, synthesizing this, remodeling bone. Doesn't matter. Just they're doing something, and they do it a little more effectively. Western medicine has never seen a substance like this. We like single drug, single function, and you come along with a molecule that may have an interface inside of every cell and help it function more effectively, and really it's a hard one to imagine.
I can't find any real legitimate doctor that thinks smoking marijuana is good for anybody. Sure, it may relieve pain temporarily, but a fifth of Jack Daniels might do the same thing, and nobody's calling that medicine, right?
People who say there is no established medical use of marijuana simply don't know what they're talking about. It's so versatile.
Seems every day when I open up the news, there's another report on cannabinoids having some type of medical utility.
Control of muscle spasticity, multiple sclerosis,
glaucoma, colitis,
nausea, pain,
migraine headaches. There are hundreds of reasons that people find marijuana useful.
That's why I look so good after 41 years in the game.
It is the most non-toxic medicine I have ever encountered. Once it's free of the prohibition tariff, it's going to be much less expensive than the pharmaceutical products which it will replace.
Think of a strain as a little chemistry lab, an organic chemistry lab, because what's happening is Mother Nature is creating her own cannabinoid profile. For instance, you could smoke a variety or use a variety that would help you with your headache, or I could use a variety that might help me with my back pain.
If an AIDS patient comes in and they have problems eating or they can't sleep, okay, you can't eat, you can't sleep, you know for sure the indica is going to put you down. It's going to relax you 100%. It's going to give you appetite. And you don't want to give him a sativa because you give him a sativa, he's going to be up thinking all night.
So it's about genes. It is about this kind of character of plant can do this and this kind of plant can do that. It's very important to keep these gene marks, that's the original ones. It could be the medicine that we need.
What is a landrace? A landrace is basically a species of marijuana that's indigenous to an area and growing there for hundreds of years in a certain area.
Cannabis is from all over the world. So we have Afghan varieties, Indian varieties.
In Colombia, you have the famous Santa Marta Punta Roja. In Central Africa, you will have the Malawi Gold. When I started this whole new series of strain hunting, it was to show the world how much people depend on marijuana around the world. We estimate that probably around 200 to 300 million people, families, are depending on this crop. It's still a drug in most countries, so the police takes it, or it's expensive, so robbers will steal it. And these are areas where the UN or other big international NGOs like UNESCO never will come. In these very remote areas, there are a lot of very nice land races. And we would like to preserve these land races for the future, so we try to obtain them and find them and bring them back. We have new varieties that we can play with to see if they will have any benefit for the future, medicinal or recreational. It's like getting a new athlete in your team that you can crossbreed and create a new variety of marijuana.
In recent years, understanding of medical marijuana's diversity has become universally widespread news. With a greater knowledge of strains has come new discoveries. These discoveries are leading us to medical benefits we never could have imagined.
Jaden's 7 years old now. Jaden was born perfectly healthy. At 4 months old, Jaden had his first seizure. It was just a downhill road for the next few years. She's having 500 twitching myoclonic seizures a day. He'd have grand mal for an hour and a half. I remember he was crying from 1 o'clock at night to 9 in the morning, screaming, crying in pain. He was seeing things. He was hallucinating from the medications. At 4.5, Jaden was taking 22 pills a day. He was at 25,000 pills he had taken by the time he was 5 years old. Jaden had tried 12 different medications. We had 40 ambulance bills. We were fighting with the insurance companies all the time. We lost our house, we lost our cars, we lost our business, we lost our family. I went to UCSF. I said, look, I don't think Jaden's gonna make it another week. What do you suggest? They're all, I don't know. I mean, I would try anything. I go, what do you think about medical marijuana? They're all, well, like we said, you think we're a life and death situation, you should try anything. So I said, all right. I went and picked up something I saw in a dispensary. Came home, I gave it to Jaden. After 4.5 years of having myoclonic seizures, 500 a day, and twitching and head drops and seizing, the first day I gave it to him was, thank God, 1 million times. It was the first day he's ever went seizure-free in his life. And then after that, second day, third day, fourth day, the seizures were down dramatically. I could see his eyes lighting up. It was summertime. It was June 1st, the first day I gave it to him, 2011. He started swimming. Jaden's never been able to swim before. The sudden temperature change of water would give him a seizure. When I put him in the front yard, and my neighbor's like, oh my gosh, we've never seen him in the front yard. They were so excited, they were cheering him on. I started weaning him off the medications after 1 month I was on the CBD. Every time I took him off, he would suffer for 2 weeks, and boom, he'd become more human. Then take off another pill, suffer for 2 weeks, boom, become more human. Jaden started chewing. Jaden was only eating Gerber food all the way till he was 5 years old. He started chewing. With taking 25,000 pills, it really wears on your body and brain, so it's kind of recovering more from the medications and from the epilepsy. And we decided to wean off the hardest one, benzodiazepines. He was having tremors, nightmares, brain zaps. I've contacted 30 different benzo withdrawal clinics. They go, how old is the person that's coming on that you want to bring into our clinic? And I tell them 7 years old. And they scream at the top of their lungs. Every single one vividly say the same exact thing. You have a 7-year-old on benzos? Because we have people here that are football players. We have people here that are big, tough guys that are dying, literally dying from benzos, and you have a 7-year-old on it? I said, 7-year-old? My son's been addicted to it since he's 16 months old. So now we have to figure out a way to wean them off by ourselves because the benzo detox clinics are not willing to take in a 7-year-old. Since we've been using the CBD, it's been doing amazing. It has under 1% THC, so it doesn't give you that euphoria. Second thing is it's abstracted, it's organic. We know the dosaging, the milligrams. We're in the forefront of something huge. It's either you're gonna give up and just let your child be a vegetable and die, or you're gonna sit there and fight. I still haven't met Jaden yet. I know Jaden in 22 pills, but I'm down to Jaden in 2 pills. That's who I know right now. I don't know Jaden, but on medication. Christmas before Jaden was born, that was my Christmas gift, was that Jaden was going to be born. My ex-wife had to give me a box, and I opened it, and I remember, it's a hard one. I remember opening the box and seeing a pregnancy test and saying positive with 2 baby shoes, and then having so much expectation, you know? Having so much expectation that, you know, you're gonna have your son. As a parent, you're expecting, you know, your child to play football, you're expecting your child to talk, you know. I mean, right now, my number one goal right now is to have my son say, I love you. I mean, people take that for granted. People take that for granted. Their kids could talk and say, I love you. That's all I want to hear my son say. But I mean, if I could hear him say that, I'll be more than happy. He said it one time on CNN, I la Lou. He was really close, but I gotta hear it. I mean, if he says that, I've already conquered the world. Seeing your child suffer, there's nothing worse than that. There's no torture worse than that, especially every day.
Now is not the time to send a message to our young people that marijuana is medicine. It is not. It is a dangerous, illegal drug.
Is it legitimate for any human on the face of planet Earth to deny another human being the thing that will remove him from that infinite torture chamber? No, it is not acceptable. It is utterly and completely immoral.
I'm not allowed to do this because someone says I can't. And that person's never met me, they're never likely to meet me, they're never likely to meet someone with MS, Parkinson's, cancer, and yet they can have total rule over that entity's life. This is pretty much the only time that I'm going to be lost for words. The justification is still not being explained to me.
Should marijuana be legalized for medical use?
Aren't there issues of significance that you'd like to talk about?
The economy,
the growth of jobs, the need to put people back to work, the challenges of Iran. We've got enormous issues that we face. But you want to talk? Go ahead. Do you want to talk about
marijuana?
I think marijuana should not be legal in this country. I believe it's a gateway drug.
Marijuana is still a Schedule I drug, meaning legally that it has no medical usefulness whatsoever. And benzodiazepines like Valium and Xanax and Klonopin are actually Schedule IV drugs, even though they put significantly more people in the emergency room every year and cause even more deaths than many Schedule I drugs.
Many attempts have been made to move cannabis out of Schedule I, and they always fail.
How can the United States government claim that there's no medical usefulness to cannabis while then patenting the medical usefulness of cannabis?
It was a shocking idea that the federal government, the Department of Health and Human Services, had a patent on cannabinoids as antioxidants and neuroprotectants, heart disease and diabetes and Alzheimer's and Huntington's, and that includes cataracts and Down syndrome as well as neoplasia. It really, speaks to the depth of the problem in terms of who's making these decisions and who are they benefiting.
We need to get to the truth, which is that prescription drugs kill vast numbers of people.
Prescription drugs have a higher rate of overdose than even things that we think of as being horrific, like methamphetamine, heroin.
The number of people who are killed by heroin and cocaine is tiny, just minuscule, microscopic by comparison with the number of people who are killed every year by prescription drugs. Let's look at the facts. Let's not listen to the bullshit anymore.
Suspected drug overdoses are rising at an alarming rate in Haywood County.
And it's not illegal drugs officials are worried about, but prescription drugs.
It's being described as an epidemic. Authorities say too many young people are dying accidental deaths.
The fifth or sixth top-selling drugs in North America are antipsychotics, because we're giving out like candy now to people, including children. At Vancouver's Children's Hospital, they've had to establish a special clinic just to deal with the effects of antipsychotics on kids.
I recently lost my father 2 years ago, and we were really, really close. So it was like having the rug pulled out from underneath me. And I started to see a therapist and a psychiatrist because I was experiencing these panic attacks, and at least 15 medications I was written. Within 2 minutes of meeting One of the psychiatrists, she called me bipolar 2 and wrote a diagnosis of it without even knowing me. You know, what I really needed was a fucking hug.
In 2010, doctors prescribed enough painkillers to give 45 milligram Percocets and 24 5 milligram Vicodins to every person in the United States.
There's a huge industry creating pills for us to take. Most of the time, they're not really anything that's curing you. They're just suppressing whatever your ailment is, in some cases making it worse.
In depressed patients, worsening of depression, including risk of suicide, may occur.
Sometimes fatal events, including infections, tuberculosis, lymphoma, other cancers,
Blisters, peeling rash, hives, or mouth sores.
nervous system and blood disorders, and allergic reactions have occurred.
The makers of OxyContin marketed it as a non or less addictive opiate, knowing already that this wasn't true. They simply suppressed that research. Hundreds of overdose deaths. They plea bargained and they agreed to pay fines. Well, they could pay that out of their left hip pocket. Nobody went to jail. Nobody suffered any criminal consequences.
If you read the small print, you'll find that there's side effects to certain drugs, but you've got to really get your microscope out.
I see this all the time with friends, even with peers, where they carry a diagnosis and they can't pronounce it. They don't know what the disease they have is called. They take drugs and they don't know what the medication is or what it could potentially do to their body.
All kind of pills and medicine and bullshit that they can't pronounce, making money off your ass, fucking you up with more medicine than you need.
There's people strung out on those pills, man.
Chief Medical Examiner Glenn Wagner says he's noticed a big rise in the quantity of different drugs people are taking.
This shopping bag represents one individual and the number of drugs that that person had on board. There are 19 separate lines on this one, and it goes for several pages.
People don't look at them as drugs anymore when they're legal, when they're over the counter. They just look at it as something you can buy from the store and put in your body, but it's still a drug.
Unintentional deaths from prescription drugs. One American dies every 19 minutes. Nothing comparable in marijuana. Is that correct?
Correct. Well, when you've got a drug that costs $1 billion to bring to market, your investment is so huge that you have to do everything in your power to make sure that drug succeeds. And sometimes the things that you do are troubling.
There are some pharmaceutical products today that are in short demand because the profit margin isn't big enough.
Just how tough is it to find the flu shot, Jocelyn?
Sonia, Darren, you'll have to make a couple of calls, and those who do have it only have a limited supply.
I mean, this happens every year when there's a bad flu and there's shortages of vaccines, right? Because there's not really a big profit motive tied to flu vaccines. It's a single dose and then you move on. Unlike something like Viagra, or especially things like cholesterol medication, heart medication, maintenance medications that people who are ill have to stay on in order to live normal lives.
If you don't need that medication, you don't need them. They take a dent in the pockets, you know what I mean? And those are very deep pockets, and they don't want them dented.
So every night on TV, you see a weird-ass drug commercial trying to get you hooked on some legal shit. And they just keep naming symptoms till they get one that you fucking got. You got athlete's foot. Are you hot? Are you cold? What you got? You want this pill, huh, motherfucker? You got to take this pill.
Prescription drugs being advertised and marketed on television is certainly something that's happened in my lifetime as a physician.
They're saying things like, ask your doctor if this drug is right for you.
Ask your doctor if Humira worked for you. Ask your doctor if Lunesta is right for you.
Ask your doctor about Cymbalta.
Do you get a weird pain in your bowel? Well, then you need to go to your doctor and you need to tell him that this is the drug you need. So hurry up. There's your check. There's my prescription. It's a transaction. I'm not a drug addict. How dare you? I'm a patient.
In every other industrialized Western country, you don't see ads for drugs. You go to your doctor, you tell your doctor what you're dealing with. They're well informed about the drugs that are on the market, and they make a recommendation for you.
I remember these commercials, and they look so happy, and I remember thinking, oh my God, there's a pill that you can take to make yourself happy? Like, how fucking awesome would that be?
If you got somebody making a commercial saying, oh, do you have these problems, do you have these problems, you're gonna relate to it off rip, like, oh yeah, that is me, maybe I do need that.
It's really frustrating to me that as a society, we don't know better at this point. They're telling you that you can take this medicine, but risk literally killing yourself to do it.
For me, it reinforces our cultural belief that if you go to a doctor, if you don't get a prescription, you haven't really had a valid encounter.
One study by a British medical journal found that for every dollar that pharmaceutical companies spend on R&D, research and development, they spend $19 on promotion and marketing of their drugs.
If I go to my doctor and I say, I saw this ad for this drug, I really would like to try it, and he says, yeah, let's give it a shot. Is he my doctor or is he my drug dealer?
They form groups like Partnership for a Drug-Free America, where they get their fucking money from prescription drugs.
I wish you didn't smoke weed. You're not the same when you smoke. And I miss my friend.
I had a joke about it, like, prescription drugs making commercials against weed is like hookers making commercials against strippers. I mean, it would have been better if I didn't stumble through the word commercial. But that's what it is.
Guess what? All of the big drug companies have used corruption in North America for at least 50 years. If you are a doctor, they will come to you and say, I will pay you to participate in a conference on the phone. It'll only take a half an hour of your time. Well, guess what the conference is? It is a drug company salesman selling you on the latest drug to influence you to prescribe that drug the next time a patient comes into your office. How are you going to feel? You feel gratitude, and your gratitude influences your decisions. Nothing should influence your decision but what is best for a patient.
There are pros to having a capitalist endeavor. There may be drugs on the market that never would have been available because that profit motive wasn't pushing these pharmaceutical companies to try and develop those new drugs. The problem is that it's not really a free market. There's like a small percentage of pharmaceutical companies that are really propped up by our Congress people because they have huge lobbies supporting them.
I recently received a notification of the top 100 pharmaceutical drugs and how much they made a year, and you see exactly what all the frenzy's about.
In 2012, the top 11 global drug companies made nearly $85 billion in net profits.
Just an ungodly amount of money for medicines, that many of which my patients have been able to stop with, something that can grow in their backyard.
Now look, I was in bed for 15 years with an extremely serious illness. I believe in the importance of the major drug companies. Does that mean that I believe in their right to push research that they have paid for into peer-reviewed journals and to prevent research that tends to indicate that their drugs don't work?
There's a case to be made for the use of pharmaceuticals. There's the appropriate use of all kinds of medications, including antidepressants, including antipsychotics. But it's hard to make a rational case for the use to the extent that they're employed in today's society. So once more, we're faced with the arbitrariness of what we consider to be acceptable and what is unacceptable.
This seems to be information that society could benefit from. But how has this vital knowledge managed to fly under radars for so long? Why are these issues not making their way to the forefront of concern in our news?
So a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that the news stations are going to cover things in the order of importance. But in reality, they cover them in the order of ratings. So if Justin Bieber's going to get the best ratings, they're going to go first.
Congresswoman, let me interrupt you just for a moment. We've got some breaking news out of Miami. Stand by, if you will. Right now in Miami, Justin Bieber has been arrested on a number of charges.
You got to sell whatever it is that wants to advertise on your show. And if your show is getting shitty ratings, they're going to replace you with a chick with big tits.
Hey, starting the news off tonight, a motherfucker killed 3 people, and we got my guy Hal Fishman standing outside right now. Hal, what's going on? Yeah, the nigga shot 3 people and blah, blah, blah. That's more attractive.
Yeah, I don't watch the news. The news is fucking depressing. They pick the worst shit to follow for a long-ass amount of time.
You think they give a fuck if Barack Obama was born in Kenya? They do if it's a good story, because it means that 2 million people are going to tune in instead of 600,000. And then you get people come out and say, well, what about nuclear bombs? That's a good point. We'll be back after this. They're going to be able to sell advertisement for X amount of money instead of W.
That kind of shit happens every day, all day. It's just a matter of which one do they want to put the most attention on.
They're skydiving cats. I believe I can fly.
I can reassure all cat lovers that the cats have not been skydiving for real.
In all that froth, I think serious debate around key policy issues often gets lost.
That's the problem with current affairs. You forget about what's important. You allow the agenda to be decided by superficial information.
Everybody cares about the advertisers. They care a tremendous amount. If you're going to do a story that affects the advertisers, you will get a call from management. Now, it doesn't mean you can't do the story, although there is heavy pressure to shift priorities within the story.
It's fucking ridiculous. Putting makeup on and pretending they're not reading off a script that's corporate approved. They have a very specific set of parameters that they're supposed to fall into.
It's okay. You can admit it if you've bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
Well, it's okay. You can admit it if you have bought an item or 2 or maybe 10 for yourself.
It's okay. You can admit it if you bought an item or 2 or 10 for yourself.
Originally, when TV first started, news was seen as something that was a public service so that you inform the American people. The deal was, you give us news and we give you the public airwaves. And then at some point along the lines, the TV stations forgot that they weren't supposed to make money off of news. And then a second thing kicked in that's really important. They realized that whenever they did investigative reporting, they would uncover something that the government was doing wrong, and it'd be a giant hassle.
You're supposed to question authority as a journalist. That's the whole point of the media. If you don't question authority, then what the hell is the point? CNN just got rid of its investigative team.
When I was at MSNBC, I looked for an investigative reporter to do some of the stories that I wanted to cover, and they said there isn't one in the building. So I got this amazing speech from the head of the network who said, look, outsiders are really cool. They wear leather jackets and they ride motorcycles. He said, but we're insiders here at NBC. We're part of the establishment and you have to act like it. He was telling me that he had just gone to Washington and they were not happy with my tone.
Do you think all these corporations and rich folks are spending money on politics because it's not good for business? No, obviously they think it's a great investment for them.
I was challenging the Republicans and the Democrats too much.
How about we didn't go into that dumbass war in Iraq and waste $1 trillion when we found 0 weapons of mass destruction? You flushed that down the toilet.
Social Security,
and now
not
you're
your
talking
politics.
about robbing people's Social Security. That is outrageous.
No, not your contempt for America. We're talking about Social Security. Stick
Contempt
to the
for
topic.
America?
What are you going to do about Social Security?
4,400 American lives in Iraq.
You have a
You have
shortfall.
contempt for America.
I remember taking several guests to task, saying all of our politicians are systematically corrupt. They get legalized bribes, which we call donations. We've forgotten that they're in essence just bribes. Now, who's going to give you money for nothing? No one, right? They're going to give you money so that you do them a favor. Every time I would point that out, it'd again be a call from management like, hey, we're not saying you can't do that. On the other hand, if you'd like to keep the 6 o'clock slot. But in that one meeting that I had with the head of the network, it was no longer implicit. It was explicit. And he said, this is the reality, and you either get back in line or we go in a different direction. If anything, I went harder after the establishment after that.
The banks, they sucked so much money out of the system that we had one of the largest economic crashes of all time. And they're not even done yet.
And then a couple of months later, they called me in and they're like, apparently you didn't get it. So you were at 6 o'clock. We're moving you from 6 o'clock to the weekends. We're going to pay you a ton of money. So hush up. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. And I didn't take the weekend job. And I went back to do the Young Turks online.
We have 3 branches of government, and those 3 branches are supposed to be part of the checks and balances that make the government work. The media and journalists are a huge part of that. I mean, you think Americans are complacent now? They'll be even more complacent if they're not given the information they need to be politically active.
Drama works on television. Now, in the world of politics, the soap opera is Democrats versus Republicans. It's not who's right in terms of the policies or ideology. What is easy is, he said this, she said that. Isn't that amazing? Look at the Democrats and Republicans. Oh, they're always fighting. Oh, now look at this. The Republicans are fighting amongst themselves. Catfights sell.
Which is why you have the red team and the blue team, you know, all over the world. It's red team, blue team.
And they have these rigid ideologies that are associated with these teams, and they just run with it.
Find a place where you are surrounded by like-minded people, and the best way to find those people is you should probably look at the maps on how counties voted.
We think it's a bunch of ideas about how the world works and how we could make it better. Sorry, that's not really what it is. Ideas are a badge of identity. They're a badge of identity for a subculture. It's my group versus your group. And I will make damn sure that my representative represents my badge of identity, my group's supposed ideas, the ones that represent my group's uniform, not your group's uniform.
And there's a lot of seemingly intelligent people that have ridiculous ideas that are cleverly worded in a nice, flowing and confident way that makes you think that what they're saying makes sense.
A lot of work gets done on tobacco, whereas drugs are pretty much specifically just to get high. It's not, I'm
But a lot of
enjoying
people
the smell
drink
of this
to get
marijuana.
high.
Yeah, but that's more of a subsidiary point.
People are not openly discussing anything, they're just defending points of view. And in defending points of view, they're defending their egos.
Which means they're expressing the ideas that they think others want to hear. Which means they're not thinking.
So you can present the facts to people, but the facts won't penetrate because it's not about facts, it's about opinions that they have to hold on to in order to feel okay about themselves.
Potheads that I knew at that time, when they said, hey, bro, hey, bro, what's that? What's going on? Every one of them are brain dead. It's fact. Everyone that I know in my long history of life, everyone that was a pot smoker, their brains are defunctated.
Fox News, as we've known for a long time, does Republican propaganda. Unfortunately, MSNBC has now come to largely do Democratic propaganda. CNN does propaganda for both. They say the Republicans said this and the Democrats said that. Now, what's the truth? Who cares? My job is just to tell you what the latest catfight is.
It creates this partisan division in the country where people feel like, I have to root for my team regardless of what they do.
It's sometimes hard to see contradictions that find their way into politics. Inconsistencies with politicians tend to get lost in a mass amount of information that now finds its way to our attention. In some cases, these contradictions sit right in front of our face.
When you look at the Obama website where they were looking for information, what is important to you? What do you want to see us do?
I have to say that there was one question that was voted on that ranked fairly high, and that was whether legalizing marijuana would improve the economy and job creation. And I don't know what this says about the online audience, but...
And he goes, oh, I don't know what that says about this group. What it says about this group is they like pot. Why don't you explain with me what's wrong with the idea that people want you to make it so that someone doesn't get locked in a fucking cage for a forbidden plant?
Yeah, I did it. I got away with it. Too bad you're not. So move on to the next question. Look at how many of us they're locking up. There's nothing funny about it.
Now, think about how mental that is. The last 3 presidents, at least, confirmed that they, in fact, did smoke marijuana. So shouldn't they be in jail? I mean, they've admitted it, right? Obama apparently rather enjoyed it.
Makes him the hip president. I'm the cool president. I'm the happiest president. I say weed. I say blow. It's all a big deal. Ha, ha, ha. Huge laugh from the college students. And if he had done time in prison, time in federal prison, time for his weed and a little blow, he would not be president of the United States of America.
This is his quote from 2008. I'm not going to be using Justice Department resources to try to circumvent state laws on this issue. Well, bullshit. That's exactly what he's been doing.
He has launched the most vicious attack on medical marijuana patients in dispensaries
that pales Bush by comparison.
He's raided me. The DEA's been in this house.
One of the reasons we are making these announcements today is to try to put to rest the notion that large marijuana businesses can shelter themselves under state law and operate without fear of federal enforcement.
In a report issued in June 2013, it was found that the DEA had performed 270 medical marijuana raids under Barack Obama in the first 4.5 years of his presidency. This was more than all 12 years combined before he took office. The Obama administration outspent the Bush administration by $100 million in about half the time.
People get freaked out when you say that. Well, Obama is hope and change, and how can you? He's a Democrat. He's a good guy. You can't say that about Obama. He had a choice. He could have done as his campaign promised and said, hey, you know what? We're not going to do the dispensary raids anymore. If you have made medicinal marijuana in your state legal, we're going to respect that. That's what he said during the campaign.
I would not have the Justice Department prosecuting medical marijuana. It's not a good use of others.
But when he goes to act, what did he do? He put the most right-winger that they had in the DEA, who was left over from the Bush years, as the head of the DEA. Now, why would you do that? You could have picked anybody, but you picked the biggest right-winger in the department. Why? And this is what people can't understand about Obama. He's a politician, just like the rest of them. So he thinks, if I can curry a little bit of favor by putting this right-winger in, well, I will seem so moderate, and that will increase my chance of winning in 2012 by maybe 0.5%.
President George W. Bush, who pretty much has acknowledged, while he was young and irresponsible and a playboy, used cocaine. And then when he was governor of Texas, signed legislation mandating anyone that uses cocaine must go to jail a minimum of 180 days. That's beyond hypocrisy.
When asked about drugs, he said, I don't want to answer the marijuana question. You know why? I don't want young kids doing what I did.
Likewise, I mean, when you look at interviews that have been done with Bill Clinton, after he left office, he openly admitted that he thinks that marijuana should be decriminalized. And it's like, oh, well, if only you were in a position to do something about that.
I wouldn't pretend that I know what pulls a president's strings, but I do know there's a stark contrast between the way every president behaves before they get in office and then once they get into office.
The general public should hold our politicians accountable for saying one thing when they're not in power and doing another when they come into power.
There's a sort of rhetorical trick they quite often use to say, oh, this was something I did in the past, it's something I regret, I wouldn't advise anyone else to do it, so they somehow distance themselves from their own person.
And the public puts up with that hypocrisy. They get it when you point it out to them, but I don't know why they put up with it.
So it may be that President X or President Y has smoked cannabis at some point in their lives or used other illegal drugs. But when they get to the top, they are going to oppress others for using illegal drugs.
That's an idea that never would have crossed the mind of any of our founding fathers. If anyone had stood up at a constitutional convention and said, hey, let's ban alcohol, that idea wouldn't have gotten very far. And it wouldn't have gotten very far, not because they were a bunch of drunks, but because the idea that the federal government had that degree of power over a sovereign individual was anathema to what they were trying to create in forming a new country.
It's essential to make decisions in public policy wherever possible based on the actual evidence that there is for something.
How else are you going to make policy? You're going to base it on some sort of faith? Or a wish that something will happen just because you want to? What are you going to do? Stand and sort of scream in the spot until you get your way like a small child? And that's effectively what some of our politicians seem to be doing.
For 6 months, I worked as a policy advisor at the highest levels of the British Civil Service, working to advise those senior people on issues of drugs and crime. And the aim of that was to get an academic in there to help give them some evidence that they could base their policies on. But I found that was actually quite a difficult job to do. Those civil servants told me that they had learnt that it's not helpful to use evidence which challenges the dominant way of thinking that's already structuring those policies. It's much easier to take the evidence that supports what you're already doing and use that to justify the continuation of your existing policy.
One of the leading figures in research in drugs policy really is Professor David Nutt.
He was the government advisor for the ACMD. The ACMD is the Advisory Council on Misuse of Drugs.
We created a 16-point scale of harms. And then we took 20 drugs and we ranked all those drugs on these 16 different harms. And then when we put all that together into this computer program called multi-criteria decision analysis, we discovered that the most harmful drug of all was alcohol. It showed that the drug laws, which ignore the most harmful drug, alcohol, were actually based on a wrong understanding of harms. Politicians wanted to get some kind of political advantage by being hard on cannabis. And our study said, well, hang on, cannabis is much, much less harmful than alcohol. And I thought I was going to be encouraged to tell the scientific truth. And then suddenly one afternoon I got a phone call saying, effectively, you've got to resign. And I said, why? And he said, because you're giving mixed messages. You know, we've got to have a line. Cannabis is bad, alcohol is good. When we say we want you to resign, it means you're sacked. So I was sacked.
Professor Nutt's dismissal came after he dared to suggest drugs like cannabis and ecstasy are less harmful than alcohol and tobacco.
It was a very interesting experience, because here you spent 10 years of your life doing what you know is right, and what you know, if that was accepted by government, by policymakers, would be better for society. And then for simple political reasons, you get humiliated publicly.
After an angry exchange on Sky News yesterday, Alan Johnson reiterated his argument in a letter to The Guardian today. Professor Nutt was not sacked for his views, which I respect but disagree with. He was asked to go because he cannot be both a government advisor and a campaigner against government policy.
But it kind of backfired on the government, because his sacking attracted an enormous amount of media attention.
Suddenly, the debate wasn't just about whether this expert committee had got it right about drugs. It was a whole debate about the role of science in policymaking.
This brings us to an interesting question. If evidence doesn't play the role we think it does in policymaking, then what does? Turns out there's this thing called lobbying. And just what is lobbying?
Lobbying is supposed to be simply getting access to the politicians and making your case, so the American people can lobby just as much as a special interest could. It's supposed to work like that, and the politician then ponders it and says, oh, well, you both made an interesting case, but I'm going to go with this side or that side. Now, that's not what it is at all, okay? The reality of what it has become is two sides come in with two checks. Whoever has the larger check wins. That's lobbying in a nutshell. So if it's defense contractors or private prisons or whoever it might be that's giving money for that issue, they're going to win. They're not going to win some of the time. They're going to win all of the time.
I think Bill Hicks said it best. Bill Hicks said, this is my impression of American politics. He goes, it's a guy holding two puppets. And people go, well, the puppet on the right is more to my liking. Well, I feel like the puppet on the left suits my beliefs. And they're like, hey, wait a minute. There's one guy, and he's holding both puppets.
Once corporations were allowed to spend money in politics, they owned politics.
Corporations are people, my friend. We can raise taxes, and of course they are. Everything corporations earn ultimately goes to people. So, where do you think it goes?
You give me money, I do you favors. Everybody got used to it. Now the media doesn't even blink. They think, well, if you're good at raising money, that must mean you're a good politician. And what does that have to do with serving the people? Do you know that 95% of the time, the person with more money wins the congressional election at the national stage? Doesn't matter if you're a liberal or conservative. The main thing that matters is, do you have more money? So in 2012 elections, they spent $6 billion on all the national elections. They spent $1 billion for the Obama campaign, $1 billion for the Romney campaign, and $4 billion for all the Senate and congressional elections. It's large donors, and they're not spending $6 billion for their health. They're spending the $6 billion to get back $12 billion or $60 billion.
I got a campaign. I need money. Who's got money? That woman with 4 kids selling $31 worth of marijuana, she's got no money. But that banker, that Wall Street guy, that corporation guy, hey, I think they have a few bucks to spread around.
It actually becomes an undercurrent to every single legislative action that we see. Everybody's concerned about re-election. Everybody's concerned about how to sell themselves, not to their constituents, but to the lobbying and the interest groups.
It fucks up the framework and the groundwork for the world that we operate in.
So where does this leave society? When those who are elected to represent the public no longer have the motivation to do so? How can balance be re-achieved? What else can alter the framework of the world around us?
If you think in terms of our communication environment, the advent of the net represented a tremendous inflection point. Before that, the sources of information that we had were pretty much institutionally structured.
That very strong filter is breaking down, and that's giving people around the world the chance to think for themselves.
I have a real bug about this. Nobody respects books anymore. Books going out the window and everyone's reading on these bloody screens. Yeah. It's just so easy to Google stuff and everyone's just like, oh, let's check Google. No! It's a real big, bugbear for me. It really annoys me.
Where do you get most of your news from today?
I think the internet, actually.
Suddenly it's a different world. The folk that control big media now no longer control the whole of that media environment.
We're not reliant, say, in England on the Daily Telegraphs and the fear that politicians have over 2 or 3 publications.
Blogs have become the media. There really is a public debate. This is like the public forum of Athens or Rome.
It's the freedom to do what you want. Can't nobody tell you what you can and can't do on the internet. You can do what the hell you want to do when you want to do it. You may connect with somebody in another country who may have some information to really enlighten the world. Because we don't know it all in America. We only know half the story. I was, closed-minded. I was just thinking about California and the lifestyle I grew up in.
In Alice in Wonderland, it said something like this: how do I know what I think until I hear what I have to say? On the internet, you can actually express yourself out loud. You can add new dimension to thinking. And for the first time, if you have an opinion, you can go out there and express it. And if you have the ability to promote it, you can get attention for it.
Post it, and before you know it, 1 million people can be following you, talking with you, and respecting your views. Or they could be talking bad about your views.
All of a sudden, issues that would not have been discussed before are being discussed.
There's these little communities based on ideas and thoughts that are building, and then those ideas turn into other ideas and other programming, and it's weird if you were to look at it like on a chart or on a graph.
In terms of the war on drugs, the internet has been phenomenal. There was a great thirst for the truth, and so anytime that truth leaked out on the internet, people would just jump on it. Oh, marijuana has medicinal benefits? Oh, wow, Richard Nixon already had the report that said that marijuana wasn't bad for you? They jump on it, and they think, thank God there's now something that lets me access the truth.
I was online in '94. That's when I first got online. But it didn't really do anything. It was sort of like putting around, and no one knew what was going on. You've got mail.
Everyone I know is on it. Email, instant messages. There's no better way to keep in touch.
You've got mail. Now with 56K, connections are faster than ever. It's fast.
If you have a phone line, you can go online.
What will they think of next?
And the mail was all bullshit. And then slowly but surely, it became this interacting monster that it is today.
Anything that you need to know about marijuana, you could just go on there and look. You could have your mind changed instantly.
In the old days, when there was 20 hippies sitting around trying to legalize marijuana with their little flyers, there was no way to fact check any of it. It sounded like a crazy hippie. Wait, you're telling me marijuana's safe and it helps you with headaches, anxiety, and all these important medical things that we're taking all these pills for? Yeah, right, old hippie. But nowadays, these hippies are online, and they have proof and facts, and for once, we're like, wow, that's not a crazy hippie, that's a smart hippie.
I can pick this phone up, and within 10 seconds, I can Google any complex question that would have required a serious education to answer before. It's become so commonplace that we don't realize how fucking completely insane it is. It's a culture-changing reality shift. People like me who had to read about things in an encyclopedia and actually go to a library and take out books on things, I'm a fucking dinosaur. The young kids that are coming up today, from the jump, have had the internet. They don't know what the world is like without the internet.
The internet is beginning to shake things up in politics, but the old momentum is clinging stubbornly, irritatingly, and disturbingly.
With the recent NSA leak, I think that you see a very specific example of politicians trying to destroy freedom of expression and freedom of speech. Collecting data on people and spying on people is a form of intimidation. If you know that the government is watching what you're doing, and you know that the government is monitoring what you are saying and what you are advocating for, you are less likely to be politically active. You are more likely to be intimidated by power. They're using that as a way to tell us to shut the fuck up.
The West fought for 500 years to acquire these basic rights, and just to hand them away thoughtlessly means that we have to fight again for hundreds of years to get them back. It's very hard to acquire basic human rights. It's very easy to give them up.
The establishment is scared to death of the internet because that's the one thing they can't control. So they figured out a way to control our politicians through donations. They figured out how to control TV through the advertising. But the internet is the wild, wild west, and they can't grab it. And no matter how much they try to plug all the holes in, the truth seems to get out one way or another anyway. It's basically the whole world sharing with one another. And the one thing that we're sharing that's really doing them damage is the truth.
The trend, if you pay attention to it, clearly is the dissolving of boundaries between people and ideas and information. And it's all going to come to a head.
The first cracks in the monolith of prohibition have already happened. Suddenly, you have Washington and Colorado actually succeeding in passing these legalization regulation ballots and becoming the first jurisdictions anywhere in the world to do so.
What's happening in the United States is that the entire underpinnings of the war on drugs are being pulled away by the population of the United States itself.
Washington State and Colorado that make it legal. And they're like, look, man, it's fucking legal here, period. It's not medically legal, it's legal. And the DEA's like, whoa, you better not. Like, what do you mean we better not?
Come on, what is our fucking voting system for if a piece of legislation that the people want gets up there and you're still going out of your way not to recognize it? How could you ask people to believe in the process if you won't respect the vote? You can't ask people to vote. They won't want to.
That's all that's going to have to happen to tear it all apart is more states just say, you know what, we're going to legalize.
They become a force that can stand up to the status quo. It's then you start to take what is yours instead of waiting for the corporations and the government to give you what they think you deserve.
One by one, individual states are defying the federal government and responding to the wishes of their own immediate population and changing the state law. Once we see that gaining pace in the United States, it's going to gain pace in the whole of the rest of the world as well.
The International Narcotics Control Board has made it clear that Washington and Colorado are in breach of the UN drug conventions. They're effectively breaking international law, and that the US is, by dint of what's happening in Washington and Colorado, also in breach of the UN conventions. Given that the UN drug treaties were very much driven by the US in the first instance, it does put them in this rather odd situation where something that they drove the formation of, they are now being disciplined and condemned for violating.
Because how can they impose these appallingly damaging laws and conventions across the other countries of the planet when they're legalizing in their own backyard?
I think it makes it very difficult for the United States to try to hold other countries in line. In Uruguay, they are experimenting with a completely new approach, and that is for the state to be selling marijuana in marijuana shops throughout Uruguay.
All across Europe, in Australia, and in fact all over the world, the whole house of cards is already coming crumbling down.
I mean, even by the time you put this documentary on air, I'm sure that there are going to be more states that have voted with their feet and changed the legal status of cannabis.
Big step today for those hoping to legalize recreational marijuana in Alaska. The campaign to regulate marijuana turned in more than 45,000 signatures to the lieutenant governor.
I mean, it's impossible to keep up right now when it comes to research, political development.
Constant stream of books and documentaries, podcasts and blog posts. The information is just overwhelming. They just can't stop releasing shit. Just like you can't stop making documentaries about it, just like I can't stop talking about it on stage or in a podcast.
What's weird is in 10 years from now, you're going to look at this film like, that's ridiculous. Remember when they had to make films about legalizing marijuana?
And it's one of the reasons why the age of information that we exist in today is so fucking important. It's so important because it's never been in the hands of the people before. And this is what happened. In the hands of the people, you see more progress in 10 years than you have in 200 years before. Because it's swarming. All the greedy pigs are trying to hold on to it, but it's like standing in the middle of the river trying to catch all the salmon with your hands. You're not going to.
The world is already moving. We already own it like we want it. They doing it in Seattle, Washington, recreational. You know, I'm on my way out there as soon as I get off this TV screen. Recreational work.
Establishment figures, they're beginning to get the message. They're realizing that it isn't in their interests any longer to demonize cannabis.
It does not make sense from a prioritization point of view for us to focus on recreational drug users in a state that has already said that under state law that's legal.
When you see a broad social change taking place in society and you realize that you are behind the curve, then you pretty soon get it, that you have to catch up with the curve.
It seems like they're falling under the weight of all this. They just go where the wind blows in order to stay alive.
I don't think it matters why people jump ship, as long as they do jump ship.
2009, you wrote a Time magazine article entitled Why I Would Vote No on Pot. You've changed your mind.
I have, and as part of my thinking recently, I've apologized for some of the earlier reporting because I think we've been terribly and systematically misled in this country for some time, and I did part of that misleading.
There's a shift taking place in our culture. The issue is once again on the table. Will the forces backing marijuana deregulation overplay their hand in some way that allows the forces of incarceration to get a jump on them?
The war on marijuana is a symptom of something that's fundamentally wrong in this country. We have to break out of the fog because the media won't do anything. No president's going to come in and change things. It comes from the bottom up, not from the top down. So you can have minor little victories, but that's tinkering. 50 years of documentation says it's not working. And what do we do tomorrow? The same damn thing.
Truth is not repeating what everybody around you automatically says. It is not repeating what everybody's going to pat you on the head for saying. It is looking for the things that people will not pat you on the head for saying, because those are the things that people really need to know. And once you are damned convinced of something of that sort, then it's your obligation to go out on a limb for it. That's truth.
We have to figure out, A, that we are temporary, and we are the people that have to pass down this fucking incredibly fucked up mess to our children. And unless we operate this world with the idea of sustainability for the culture, sustainability for the community, sustainability for humanity in general, you're going to have resentment at every turn. You have people profiting and people failing and people being victimized. But the reason why we are so complex is also the reason that I think that we have hope.
8 years and 2 films later, we once again arrive left with more questions than answers. Where do we go from here? How do we move forward without taking 2 steps back? And again, sits that ever-lingering question that we just can't seem to shake.
Will marijuana ever fully be legalized?
Probably yes.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I'm no doubt about it.
Marijuana prohibition is a zombie. It is a walking corpse.
It could be decades, but historically, it's a blip.
I think marijuana will be fully legalized and taxed in my lifetime. Whether we'll ever get Singapore doing it, we'll see.
Globally? I can see Iran doing it, can't you?
Instead of going one city, one state at a time, make that shit legal everywhere and pop the top, and let's go.
I think it's just around the corner, but you know, I've always thought that. I've been wrong up to now, so I'm probably wrong now. I don't know.
I doubt it seriously. I believe that the forces controlling the way things work in the United States will give us lots of process before we ever get to total legalization.
I can die with the satisfaction of knowing it's inevitable now. They're never going to get the cat back in that bag again. He's out. And what we see now is this culture struggling to make an accommodation for this new kid on the block.
There'll come a point, you know, when this will probably end. But if it's not today, then somebody will be locked up today. Somebody's life will be ruined today. And that somebody is probably hundreds of people. To begin to demonstrate an understanding of humanity is so counter to our way of thinking. It's throw away the key. Let's lock them up. And you believe it up until your son or your daughter or your friends or yourself gets caught up in the same nightmare. And then now you're going, oh my God, now I understand. But do you?